Hello.
Hello.
That was a little surprise entrance there.
So,
Veganism today. Question that we get a lot on Propane from clients, from readers. So, for anyone who hasn't heard of veganism, just to quickly go over the distinction, veganism is not eating any animal products, so flesh or their milk or eggs. Vegetarianism, eggs and milk allowed, no meat. So we all knew that, but the question is...
I'm not sure I did, but yeah.
The question is it better for health? Is it better for body composition? And also, is it better as a kind of moral stance? So, first of all, we are not... Johnny's just pushing me away.
just so that... Because it felt like this before, which is weird.
Yeah, we get this question a lot, and we're not making any kind of judgment of people who are vegetarian or vegan. I think it's a very noble cause, but there are certain things that we need to consider and manage, otherwise we end up in a little bit of a problem.
So there are, from our perspective anyway, and this is, again, just a caveat from what Yusuf was saying, we coach clients who are by choice vegan or vegetarian, and from our experience of working with them and people we know who make these decisions, there are pretty much like two reasons or two like buckets of reasons why somebody would choose to be a vegan or to choose a vegetarian lifestyle. So one side of that is health, whether that's the improvement of health or the prevention of disease. And the other side is ethical. So wanting to reduce the amount of animal-based products that are consumed, wanting to reduce the harm to animals as a result. So we're going to discuss it split between those two reasons, what we think of both, and then also round off with some actual recommendations rather than just bashing a concept and not giving anything helpful. So inside of health, if we look at improvement, so one of the reasons why someone would choose veganism, for example, and we'll focus on veganism mainly rather than vegetarianism, but they'll choose veganism because they think they're going to improve their health, so there's going to be more micronutrition. They maybe think there's a body composition aspect to it. And there is a side to this that is good. So there is a side to this that, anytime you make a blanket, all-out, very extreme change to anything that you're doing nutritionally, it forces an awareness, it forces a change of a lot of habits. And for someone who's otherwise not done anything nutritionally before, saying, right, I'm going to be a vegan now, is probably going to enforce a lot of habits that they maybe didn't have before that are positive.
So if that's the only thing that you change, you're like, I'm going to be a vegan, suddenly you've made a diet that is completely unconscious into something that is conscious, and you're paying attention to what you eat. And in most people's cases, that's going to result in a net improvement. What we're saying, though, is that doing that alone is not optimal. There are health benefits to veganism, so reduced cardiovascular disease, reduced blood pressure, but along with that comes the risks of nutrient deficiencies. And this is just because we're taking such a sledgehammer approach. There's nothing particular about veganism that is naturally more healthy, and we have adapted with our teeth and our ability to metabolize protein to eat meat, and we are developed to be omnivores. Now, the deficiencies that you come about with veganism is kind of, in a way, being a vegan is a luxury that we have in the Western world, but we end up developing B12, vitamin D, and cholesterol and protein, as well as odd-chain fatty acids and things like that. So when these things would be hit quite easily if you were naturally just eating whatever, you wouldn't have to pay any attention to that. Suddenly, when you eliminate swathes of foods that you can't eat anymore, we're going to have to go and consciously supplement with those to make sure that we're not deficient in those things.
So I think that's a huge thing for me, that we were discussing this before we came on the live video, and I was saying that I consider myself as someone who pays a decent amount of attention to my diet, to my intake. I manage how much of various foods I consume per day. I manage my total calorie intake. I have no idea how much vitamin B12 I consume, but
it's not a concern.
Exactly. So without eliminating these huge things, it's not something that I need to be consistently thinking like, am I managing that micronutrition aspect of my diet, or am I getting enough protein from sources that are bioavailable? rather than having to, I would completely have to focus on that on a daily basis. And from actually living that reality side of the equation, like popping out to a cafe with a friend for lunch becomes a very well, is there actually going to be something there that I can have? So I think the improvement side of this, obviously, as Yusef says, there's a lot of downsides to this that maybe aren't as publicly discussed. Deficiencies that can develop in the background and become pretty serious if you let them run their course. It requires a lot of mental RAM to manage, but also just the consistency and the stress side of it that results from actually having to manage this on a daily basis. Every meal becomes something that you need to pay more attention to every day, every week. Food shops are different, social life's different. Like, all these things have massive shifts in what it's actually like, all because you are riding on this benefit or riding on this potential benefit that it's going to improve my health if I just don't eat any animal produce anymore.
So if you're prepared to take on extra problems, extra mental load as a result of that, then that's fine. But if the primary reason, and we will get onto the moral reasons for this, but if the primary reason is health, that you're going vegan, then our opinion is that you're just taking a sledgehammer to something which doesn't need to be that extreme. If you want to improve your cardiovascular health, we don't need to throw a baby out with bathwater. Getting rid of meat is not the key thing, despite the film What the Health will try and tell you. Losing weight, getting leaner, and simply being active, all of those will improve your cardiovascular health way more than the specific diet changes. Also, it is possible to fuck up a vegan diet and still overeat. How many vegans do you know? And if you know like 2 or 3, I bet you know one of them that just eats chips all the time because it's fine. But you can still get fat on a vegan diet, believe me. So
yeah, so it doesn't violate It doesn't violate any of the basic assumptions that we use in any diet management protocol, which is that obviously calories matter, micronutrition, macronutrition matter. You're just choosing a different kind of high level approach, which is like, I'm only going to eat these things, but everything else is still applies. And I think I've completely lost my train of thought.
So going for something like, I'm going to have a simple rule to not eat. So like, I'm going to just not eat meat and meat products, and that's going to be my simple diet rule, and it allows me not to think about it. That's false, because you actually suddenly have to think about a whole lot more things that you didn't have to previously worry about, like your B12 and your cholesterol and all that stuff. We just got a comment from Matthias saying, hi, vegan watching. Okay, we've got to be really careful not to upset you.
The other thing that I really resent, so I if you've seen me mention it before, Chris, who's sometimes on the podcast, messaged us and he was like, guys, you should watch What the Health. It's such a great thing. So I was like, okay, fine. Like, I trust Chris. I trust Chris's opinion. So I devoted 90 minutes of my life to watch this program. And I think the thing that I really resent, that really pisses me off, is when people say, I'm doing something because it's really good for my health. Like, how do you know that? Like, you can't just say, oh, it's good for this weird, multifaceted thing that I can't actually measure or define, without saying these blood markers changed, or this part of my health, my psychology, my physiology changed. So if you are going to do it for your health, at least measure or manage something, because otherwise you're making a huge decision to cut out things that are ultimately really nice for the sake of something that you may not even know whether it's working or not. And to be honest, you may get the benefits from veganism. I'm not saying you do, but you may get the benefits from veganism by just increasing your fruit and vegetable intake from your existing diet. So
the other problem
there's that aspect as well.
Even if you do measure your biomarkers and your blood tests and everything, and then you do a vegan diet and things improve, great, good for you, but there's actually no indication that it was specifically veganism that did so. Some people find that being vegan means you eat more vegetables, vegetables are more satiating, therefore you eat fewer calories, and that's what improves all of your health and all your health markers. It's a bit like, it was an analogy that Eric Helms used, which was, we as the kind of online bodybuilding community have decided that if you want to go into a room, you need to do a rain dance and then spin around the door a few times before you come into the room. Otherwise, you won't be able to get in. And no one's ever questioned the fact that maybe that isn't necessary. Maybe you can just go straight into the room. So sometimes we're doing a lot of extra stuff that isn't necessary to achieve that goal.
I think with anything we recommend on the diet side of the equation, that
just almost fell over there.
It's all the anger and hate from years. it's just have a clear understanding of firstly, what are the downsides, what are the benefits? Like, what do I stand to achieve? What am I risking health wise, social life wise, psychology wise? And then also understand why you're doing it, or have a really clear reason why you're doing it. So I would always say, like, if someone asks you in a bar, like, hey, why are you a vegan? Or like, hey, why are you doing this? You can just clearly and concisely say, oh, well, it's changing this. Or like, I'm noticing a change in this, and I can measure that and I can show you that. That's not my opinion. That's data that I can enforce that with numbers that change over time. Because if not, then you do actually risk completely wasting your time. And you don't get time back. So
that's quite a good point. You have to be able to defend any of the decisions or lifestyle choices that you take.
I nearly just fell over there.
Slippery floor. And if you can't defend them, that's fine, but you need to be aware that whatever view you're taking, it will be considered a religious faith view and not something that is evidence-based. So another common criticism that we do get, another common, defense of veganism is, oh, but I've seen this bodybuilder and he's massive, and so you must be able to gain muscle. So this is less health, this is more body composition now. And he was able to gain so much muscle, and so it's probably fine. Neglecting to mention that this guy is on like 3 grams of tren a week, and that's probably the thing that's able to just blow past any kind of disadvantages of veganism and allow him to hold a lot more muscle.
And that's, I think, so anytime someone tells you to do something, or you follow someone else because they're doing something, and you do that thing as a result, like, just consider all of the aspects of that. So we know people who have watched the What the Health documentary, think it's a fantastic argument, and have changed their lifestyle as a result. Fine, great, fantastic. I watched the documentary and think it's a pretty one-sided argument that's based in fear-based marketing.
So
basically.
Glad I didn't end up watching it. That's 90 minutes saved.
I saved you, sir.
See, even Matthias, who is a vegan, says What the Health is shit.
Yeah.
It looked like a very scaremongering.
It is. And a lot of the messaging and a lot of the arguments they use, a lot of people they interview are financially motivated. Not that that's a bad thing, but I do think it adds bias. And they don't ever really consider, like, what are the downsides of veganism? And I think that, as a result, discredits a lot of what it's saying, because it's not providing a balanced argument. So the same as with the bodybuilder analogy, like, just consider all sides of something before jumping in, because it is a big decision. Like, if you're going to stick to this, it's a big cost to your life.
This is the Daily Mail thing as well, where people poke on your triggers and your fears and your paranoias of the Western medical healthcare system, and the fact that there's some big secret that's being withheld from you, and the real answer lies in veganism. And it was from what you said, they were claiming that meat is the cause of cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, which is fucking
not in so many words, but they were. Yeah, I think the guy was arguing that, like, the natural assumption for diabetes is it's based on, like, obviously body weight is a factor, carbohydrate, insulin. They talk about insulin sensitivity and things like that. But the main, I'm going to get criticised because I'm sure I'm misquoting, but I'm sure the main arguments were based around either dairy or meat. Like, animal products are the cause or one of the biggest drivers of diabetes. And that makes Yusef really upset.
It makes me very upset. So basically, none of us would ever die if we just stopped eating meat. There are a few things that do have some basis. So the nitrates issue in processed red meat, there is a very small association with cancer, but no food is binary. No food is pure good or pure bad. If it was pure bad, it would be considered a poison and we probably wouldn't eat it. I know some things slip through the cracks, like tobacco, for example, which doesn't really have any kind of positive benefits that I know of, apart from ulcerative colitis. But anyway, so red meat, for example, there are many micronutrients in red meat, and the poison is always in the dose of any food. So whether if you're pounding the processed sausages every day, and you are also inactive and all the rest of the stuff, then maybe you're at higher risk of heart disease, and you could then say, oh, well, it was because I ate the meat that did this. But we're missing a few stages there. Do you see where I'm getting at?
So I think it and this comes back really what we'll touch on in a little bit, which is our recommendations. But are you laughing at the comments?
Yeah.
So Cormac has asked, is Deca vegan? Dan Fraser thinks that I'm going to bench 160 in comp, which, if you know me personally, you'll know is an extremely sore topic, so thank you for upsetting me, Dan. If I was vegan, so I'll definitely have to go vegan now. And then Melissa is shocked that Yusef swears.
Said a naughty word.
So am I, Melissa. He promised me that he wouldn't. He's always swearing on the internet, and I have to rein him in. So I think variety, and while it's a really kind of like, it's a cop-out piece of advice, but moderation is actually something that in this instance is a really good thing to practice and manage. Because any time you go really black and white on something, more often than not, if you just went shades of grey, you'd find a much more happy, much more sustainable medium. And that will not only afford more mental space, so you're not stressing about it, but also you can benefit from the variety of the benefits of these different foods without actually boxing yourself into one of these potential, what's the phrase? Like if you subscribe to an if you subscribe to like a certain way of being, a certain way of eating, you carry the benefits and the downsides of that rather than diversifying more by just eating whatever you want in moderation and managing the total calorie intake over time.
This is the other thing as well about hedging. So the common financial advice is rather than put all of your money into Brent crude oil and you'll be subject to all of the ups and downs, we want to try and spread our risk and split your money over several assets. The same thing goes for food. As I said, nothing is purely good or bad, but the poison is in the dose, and certain things may accumulate if we eat too much of them or if we eat ridiculous amounts of any one food. Veganism limits the scope of foods that we're already able to eat, and so it may be that there is some kind of pesticide that has some downstream carcinogenic effect that we're not aware of and we won't find out until 10 years' time. If you've been nailing a certain type of food, you've been increased your dose of that and you've increased your risk. The thing that Alan Aragon says is the best way to hedge your risk is just to eat the most varied diet that you can, subject to your calorie goals and your macronutrient goals.
So something that we use in our coaching programs is Alan Aragon has a pie chart, a way of distributing your sort of how to decide where to allocate your calories within your diet. And the bulk of that is whole foods with minimal processing that you enjoy to eat. And I think the important caveat there is that you enjoy to eat. So you're not just following a diet that is painful, that requires lots of cost, or it is really inconvenient, or it doesn't taste very nice. And then you allocate the rest of your calories to whole foods that are required for balance that you are kind of okay with, and then processed foods and blatant processed foods that you love and really enjoy, but they still have a place. And so the key there is there's consideration made for the basic stuff, macronutrition, micronutrition, variety, satiety, convenience, affordability. But he's also acknowledging that we're just human beings and everybody's got a capacity to give in and lose willpower and lose discipline and think, you know what, I just love a big burger this evening, instead of thinking, well, I told myself I'd be vegan, so I'm not going to do that. And riding the stress and the kind of the social and psychological cost of that.
But it's fine, we'll just load up on the chips instead. So
whoever you know who just eat chips better not be watching, because they'll be upset.
It's actually Matthias. No, it's not. Sorry, Matthias. I didn't accuse you there. So now that we've laid into veganism, I do have to say I really admire it. And fundamentally, the slogan "meat is murder" is true. Like, meat is murder, and I admit that I'm a terrible person for eating meat because I can't really justify on a moral basis that I'm eating meat just to improve my body composition a little bit and to have a nice meal. Saying that though, I don't know if you've ever seen the comedian Sean Locke, but he talks about, he says when they're pushing recycling in the UK, he says you look over to America and they're cleaning up oil spills with baby seals, and then here I am like cleaning out my little Marmite jar in my room, like got to get all the Marmite out as if like it's going to make any kind of difference. And there is definitely a pissing in the wind phenomenon where if you are if you're not eating meat and thinking that it's going to change the world, then obviously that's a delusional thought. But if you're doing it to reduce your overall personal impact, your annual consumption of meat, so that you're not contributing to that system, then you know what, hats off to you, and I admire that. But we have to then realise that we're taking on all of the other risks that Jonny mentioned of risking your diet and having to top up those deficiencies that you've created.
And I think as well that the common like response or retort to that is, oh well, if everybody felt that way, then we'd never get anywhere. And the unfortunate reality is that at the moment, the reason that you go into, at least in the UK and in most places, you go into a supermarket and there are aisles full of meat. There are aisles full of animal produce. And the reason for that is that there is sufficient demand to fuel those decisions. Like, these are huge corporate engines that are driving decisions with lots of, the teams of people deciding, what should we fill our shelves with? Shelf space is finite, it's scarce. How are we going to maximize the profit? And the demand for meat and animal produce is there, and it will be there for a sustained period of time, for a long period of time. And unless there's some huge change to the incentive structure, unless there's huge changes in tastes and preferences, we're unlikely to see a massive social shift away from meat towards pure plant-based products. But that doesn't mean that you can't do your piece for that. But I think the message that we're trying to get across is that saying, I want to do my part for reducing the toll that is placed on livestock and animal health and animal well-being by making a dietary decision, by making a decision, it doesn't mean that you need to subscribe to this extreme ideology of, I'm going veganism, meat's horrendous, animal products are horrendous. You can be somewhere in the shades of grey in the moderation by just getting more variety in your diet and saying, you know what, I'm going to rely less on animal-based products for my protein, for my micronutrition. I'll add some more plant-based products in there. So there's a place in the middle where everybody's happy, where you don't have to make documentaries about it that piss off half the internet, and you don't have to be really extreme with your opinions. There are ways to meet in the middle with that, the ethics side of things as well.
That's actually our recommendation for you today as well, that if you're thinking of going vegan, or if you are vegan and this has triggered you or pushed any kind of buttons, maybe have a think about whether you can justify things on any of these domains. If you can fully, then fine. If not, and you're worried about supplementing or creating deficiencies or any of these other things, or you just want to de-risk your diet, then we would consider maybe going like part-time vegetarian. You can still reduce the average number of animals that die as a result of you over the year. Speaking of which, Jonny and I went for 125 chicken wings the other week. 62.5 chickens had to die for our meal, which is terrible.
Yeah, terrible.
We are awful people.
Feel terrible.
You can go part-time veggie as long as the best things to try and cover your risk with this stuff: cholesterol, so eggs and butter. Check out the Menno Henselman's article on Bayesian bodybuilding about cholesterol and how it's just maligned and not as bad as we often thought. Protein, so get some whey protein, again a dairy product, but the bioavailability and the amino acid profile is unrivaled compared to vegan sources of protein. And then the rest of it will generally be okay. You can then account for not having to have much meat. Being vegetarian from a body composition perspective is much easier and much less of an uphill struggle than being vegan.
It's just something, just to close on getting triggered by this, like either getting triggered by the video or by this argument. I would really sit and consider that if us giving these arguments has bothered you in some way that is on an emotional level, maybe just consider, like, what is the reason that you're actually following veganism or vegetarianism? Because and what I was saying earlier, like, you should be able to justify, you don't have to justify it to us, but you should be able to justify it to yourself. Like, I'm doing this and I understand why, and I can show you the data, or I can show you how it's affecting me from a numerical, non-emotional, not an opinion-based perspective. And if you have that, then there's no reason to get triggered, because you're doing it for you and you know it's working for you. We try as much as possible to not just like give our opinion and go like, oh, fuck you, like that's shit. We try and do it from a middle of the road, like, here's what we think the evidence suggests, here's what the rational perspective suggests. And if you've been offended by that, then you probably aren't doing it for the right reasons. And you are maybe running into some of the risks and downsides of, if you don't micromanage this stuff really, really carefully, there are some risks to it. So you just should consider that. So I think that's kind of my view on being triggered in general.
This is something you mentioned the other day.
Unpick it and work out why.
Exactly. Well, so in Johnny's live stream the other day about sex, this was saying it was more actually about self-honesty, but using sex as the example for people that go into a fitness pursuit, they want to improve their physique, and they're telling themselves a story about why they're doing it. But really, at the end of it, they just want to nail birds. Now, this is a very similar example, that some people wear veganism as if it was a garment, as if it was an accessory, because along with it comes a lot of other identification, a lot of other kind of cool things that you can say about yourself, and so it becomes part of your identity. And one of our core desires is to distinguish ourselves and to create a separate identity for ourselves. So if that is the reason, it may be hard to admit to yourself that this is why you're doing it. And actually, if you look through the evidence, to be honest, I think most people, if they're in that position, will cherry pick evidence to support what they're doing. Because to look inwards and actually be that honest with yourself and say, you know what, I'm wearing this as an identity, is a lot harder to do. But it's something that if you're offended by this, then particularly you might be the kind of person that wants to look within and see whether that's part of it. And if it is, that's fine. We all identify ourselves in front. Johnny wears a big dream t-shirt. I wear a bit of sort of pajama. So,
and if you offend my t-shirt, I will get really upset. So, and I'll be really triggered by it. No, but I think being offended by anything on the internet is a great way to, red flag.
It's a great barometer.
Why is that bothering me? It's because I self-identify with that. And if you want to eat only vegan because it makes you feel really great and you can tell people who are eating a burger that they're an idiot and they're a dickhead, then that's fine. That's a reason, and I can get on board with having a reason that makes you feel good and benefits you. But I would just say be careful if you're following it for emotional reasons rather than for data-driven reasons, because you can run into downsides, or you can run into risks, health risks, social risks, wasting your time and regret doing it. We spent, 10 years following stuff that someone just told us to do, specific carb timing, buying supplements, investing money, following stuff that is wasted time that we thought was doing what we wanted it to do, and it ultimately didn't. And it's really painful to look back on. And you don't want to be that guy, that girl in 10 years looking back going, I remember when I was vegan because I watched that Netflix documentary. What a stupid thing that was.
Well, there's so many examples of that. If you look back at when you were a teenager, how many of the things that you did, which you thought were it's not a phase, Mum, I promise, actually were things that you were just doing to fit in or to try and stick out or identify yourself in some way. And we look back on it with objectivity because the emotion's gone, and we realise actually it was very clear at the time, but we didn't want to admit to ourselves. And I think, as Johnny said, using offence as a barometer for
not a garden fence, sorry,
such a dad joke. Using offence or being offended as a way to be you know what, maybe I need to do some work on this and explore what is the root of this, is always going to produce some really good insights if you have the balls to actually jump in and do it.
Because otherwise you'd be sat there eating your salad and hummus and thinking oh my god, what am I doing this for? So just be really clear on the reasons why. And so
Frankie's just said, I regret doing the keto diet for 6 months. Don't worry, Frankie, I'm coming for the keto diet.
We've got a keto video coming. So if you've enjoyed our slant on veganism, we're going to be doing the same thing on keto. And I'm going to have to really rein you stuff in. So to end with some actionable stuff, some advice, either if you are following a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet now, or you're not and you're considering it, what do we think about it? What are our recommendations? Well, firstly, as I think you'll get from what Yusef was saying, from the specific micronutrient health benefits and risks, we think vegetarianism is a better choice than veganism. But we also think, I think the caveat to that is to be really clear on why you're doing it and how you are planning to convince yourself that it's working, or just to if you ever have to, convince someone else that it's working. So if it's, I really want to improve my health, be clear on what does health mean to me? How do I define health, and how do I change it? Or how do I improve my disease prevention? How am I going to define and measure that? And so, are you reading the comments?
Yeah.
All right, I see. So be clear on why, and then also remember that if the why is really clear and defined, you may be able to reach that goal without going super extreme, without going vegan or vegetarian. Maybe the goal that you're trying to achieve could be achieved by just eating more of a varied diet, or following that pie chart distribution of considering, what am I deficient in my diet, and how can I plug that deficiency, rather than I'm going to sign up for a cult and do something really extreme.
If you want to have a flat rule, fine. Just say, I'm not going to pick a food that you eat a lot of and contributes to your calorie surplus. For me, it's cereal. Cereal for me is dangerous because you can just pound a box of it and not feel very full.
Think of all the cereals that have been harmed.
That have been harmed in the making it. Yeah, exactly. So to say, I'm just going to cut out cereal, or I'm going to cut out full sugar Coke, something like that, and then you've got a flat rule. You don't have to think about it. If you want more on that kind of stuff, the minimal tips that will just drift you towards your goal, it's not the approach we generally recommend. We think tracking is always a better approach to begin with. But if you're so busy that you just want something quick, check out Dieting for the Lazy Man. It's an article on the website. We will post it in the comments, but you can search it on the new lovely search bar on propanefitness.com as well.
Everyone, thank you for watching. This has been really long, 30 minutes, bloody hell. It's nearly like a TV episode.
Oh God, well done for making it this far.
If you're watching this and you're like, you know what, I like these guys, I like their opinion, I think Yusef's a bit aggressive, but I really like them. I'm only joking. Then there's a link in the comments below to grab a free ebook download. There's basically 5 of our tips, strategies of how...
5, wow.
Well, I know 5's loads. Of how we go about managing, like, simple stuff. How do we integrate that into our lives? So, how do I manage alcohol? How do I track when I eat out? How do I go about, like, balancing healthy with flexible, functional, etc. So that's all free, and that's available in the link. It's called Macro Formula, fatlossmastery.com/macro formula. All right. Oh, and also, if you like the video, we'd love it if you can give a like, comment, share below. If you know someone who's vegan who gets really offended and you want to start an argument on the internet, so do we. Tag them below, and we'll happily discuss
please tell
things.
them to send all hate our way. And
Great. Thanks, guys. We'll speak soon.